For those that have been following, I've done a 5 episode series on entrepreneurs and people pleasing. And I said that the last week was the final episode. However, I have a fun surprise for you. My good friend and coach, Suzy Wraines, is my very first guest on the podcast. She is a business coach, and her company is Starting a Business Simplified. She works with new entrepreneurs. And although she focuses on medical personnel who want to start a business, I have referred so many people to her podcast because all of the information she gives can be utilized by anybody starting a business. So, welcome, Suzy. And if you would just introduce yourself to everybody.
Thanks, Sandy. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you so much for all of the wonderful words. Starting a business is the same for everybody. And even though I speak directly to medical people, like you said, it's all the same stuff. It's just, I work with medical people because a little bit of my background, I came from a medical background. I actually was a medic in the Army, and then I worked in veterinary medicine. And I also have a business degree. So I kind of merged those two together and created, oh, this is challenging for a medical person because they're coming from a system that already has structures in place, which is something that I would love to share today on the podcast around the people pleasing, into something where it's just open-ended. Do whatever you want, set it up however you want. And it's very confusing. So that's why I work specifically with medical practitioners, is because I understand what that's like to come from knowing exactly what to do and always having everything mapped out to do whatever you want and figure it out. It's very confusing. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I was your first guest on your podcast, and now you're my first guest on my podcast. So it's a fun little tidbit of information to share. Suzy and I have known each other for, is it 6 years now? I think.
Yeah,
We
we're
went through
going on
coaching.
7 years.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? We went through coaching school together, but we didn't actually meet in person until last year. Was it last year? I think. I think it was last year was the first time
Yeah.
we met in person at a retreat. And we've been going like gangbusters ever since. Well, back to the entrepreneurs and people pleasing, the 5 videos and podcasts, because I did an episode for each, videos on YouTube and then the podcast, um, are all around people pleasing that entrepreneurs do. And the 5, just as a refresher for those that haven't watched them yet, make sure you go back and watch. But there was one on making assumptions about a client's reaction, whether it was real or perceived. There was one about apologizing for your pricing. There was one on boundaries, about always saying yes. No matter what the client asks, you say yes, and why that's not a good idea. I did one around overwork, basically feeling like you're doing everything and the hustle, and feeling like that hustle is going to make things flow, which doesn't always pan out. And then the 5th one was on undercharging, mainly to avoid conflict. And in each of those episodes, I talk about the people pleasing personas and how each one has their own flavor, if you will, related to that topic. And Suzy, you and I have talked quite a bit about people pleasing and business in that. And I know you've listened to all of them. So, as a business coach helping people get started, what is, or what are, maybe could be a better question, what are some of the things that you see most often that new entrepreneurs have a tendency to do around people pleasing when it comes to starting a business?
So I'm going to answer that, all the things that you just named. So if, for those of you listening, if you haven't listened to those episodes, go back and listen to them, because I touch on all those things in working with people because they'll come up. The one thing that stood out, that stands out for my clients mainly, but I'm sure everybody, is the boundary piece. If you're coming from a structured environment where you're working for somebody else, so you have what your workflow is laid out as, or how things are set up and how they're done, and then you go into being an entrepreneur, there's no line, there's no structure, there's no, it's, I remember sitting down at my laptop when I first started. This was when we were in coaching school, and I was like, what do I do? Because like I don't have, nobody said when I needed to start work. Nobody said when I needed to take a break. Nobody said when I needed to take lunch. Nobody said what I need to be working on. It was scary. I was like, what do I do? Like, where do I start? How do I? So when I was listening to the episodes, I was like, what is the one common theme coming through all of these episodes? And it's setting boundaries, really. People pleasing is not having boundaries. You're not saying no, or you're saying yes when you want to say no. You're saying no when you want to say yes. Like you're doing the opposite of everything that you feel like you should be doing because you're concerned about the other person or the other situation, or you're not considering yourself. And as a business owner, entrepreneur, now I know I grew up in this generation of the customer's always right. So when you think of it from a business perspective, when I started my business, I was like, well, then I got to do everything that my clients want because they're always right. That's not true. That is a belief that was generated for customer service in a way that helped the customer, but not in a way that sacrifices the business. So you shouldn't be sacrificing yourself to make your clients happy. Well, how does all this unfold in actually creating that as an entrepreneur? It's in how you design your business practices. When I sat down and I went, I have a blank screen, what do I do? Well, the first thing I should have done is look at my calendar and design, when do I work? Because that's something that your boss would tell you. Like when you get a job and you go in the first day at work, when do you want me to show up? Oh, well, come in on Monday at 8. They tell you. So I started to process it from I'm now my own boss. So now I have to think of it as, what would I tell myself? When do I start work? That's been one of the most challenging things working with clients for me, their calendar. Because again, they fall into the people pleasing. I have to show up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And especially with technology now, everybody has a phone, their notifications are going off all day long. And so one of the biggest things is identifying, when do you want to work? And then writing it down. These are the hours I work, and writing down business policies. What are the expectations? And you can have the client be right and first. You can have that customer service feel without overextending your boundaries, because you tell them, I'm only available from 8 to 5 or from 8 to 2. And that's when you're going to hear from me. And then they know, and you've written it down. So there's no, you can take the emotion out of it. So then I'm not feeling bad when I'm not replying to them at 10 o'clock at night. And what kept coming up for me personally, listening to the episodes, was it's emotional. When you start a business as an entrepreneur, you are tied to it so emotionally that it's hard to say no. It's hard to not want to reply at 10 o'clock at night. And I actually just did this on one of my episodes. I can't remember which one recently, where I talked to him about if you have to make a reminder, I put stuff on my calendar. If I get a notification from a client, because I recommend, yes, you want to be aware of your clients, talk to them, reply to them. That's part of their experience. Don't do it at 10 o'clock at night if you don't work at 10 o'clock at night. But maybe you have to set reminders. So if I get a notification from a client late at night and I'm like, I'm not answering that, but I know I need to answer it, and I know it's going to get lost in the shuffle of emails or texts or whatever, I go straight into my calendar and I put it on my calendar, reply to so-and-so immediately. So when I go to my desk on Monday and I pull up my calendar, it's right there. So I'm not giving up my boundaries, but I'm being responsible. So
I love that.
we can be customer service oriented without just giving it all away and doing everything. So I would say that to answer your question, the biggest thing is time management and really setting those boundaries. And if you write them down, then you don't resent the people that you work with. I've had clients that are like that. They resent their clients because they didn't create the boundary. And then they're frustrated. Well, they keep emailing me like 20 times a day. And well, did you tell them that you're only going to answer 3? I will reply to you 3 times within the boundaries of what we set, you know? So a lot of it is setting expectations, but you have to decide that for yourself first. Like you first, what do you require? And then figure out how that fits.
I think that's so important because I remember when I first started, I had similar, feelings to you, like, okay, well, what do I do? And and I think too, because when I started, I was still working full time. So, it was like that, I think was even harder. And I'm sure you have clients that are working full time and trying to start their business as well. But so then you're trying to manage work, family, business, all the other extracurricular things. And so then you feel like, well, that's the only time that I can do it. I love that idea of making a note to put it on your calendar to respond the next day. No, for me, I think when I know when I first started, I struggled with that whole piece and even got to the point where it's like, okay, I put that in my contracts, my client contracts, like when I would be available, that they needed to give me at least 24 hours to respond because they can't expect that we're going to be available immediately because we have lives too. So I think that's super important. And I'm guessing, and I would agree that one of the things people struggle with the most because they feel like, well, gosh, if I don't do it right away, if I don't respond, if I don't say yes, then I'm going to lose them. But
Yeah. And that again, that's the emotional piece. So, what you talk about a lot on your podcast is healing from wounds that cause that people pleasing to surface. It's like if I have an internal wound that, and I can say an example for me would be I was the youngest as a kid. And so I was always fighting for attention because I don't know if most families are like this, but the youngest is usually like, whatever, we already did the other two. We know how it works. She's just, it's like the first baby's always like, oh my gosh, we're going to do everything and they're amazing. And then the second one's kind of like, we kind of got it, but we kind of don't. They're cute together, kind of. And then by the third one, they're like, yeah, whatever. I was actually left at my uncle's house right after I was born because my mom forgot she gave birth to me. Because she's like, well, I've been carrying you around for 9 months, and then and then when I had you, I totally forgot you weren't attached to me anymore, and we just left you at your uncle's house. And we got home, we're like, where's Susie? Oh my gosh, she's still at your uncle's
well, now that's a
house.
story I hadn't heard from you before. So, oh my
Mom told
gosh.
it to me because I don't remember because I was in it,
Wow.
but that would explain why I was always tugging on coattails as a kid. Hey, I'm right here. People pleasing to get, to pull that merging pattern, trying to pull other people's energy. So being an entrepreneur and going, oh my gosh, if I'm not everything to everybody, then I'm nothing. I'm not going to get anything. That's an old wound from being a kid who wasn't paid attention to that much. So understanding that and saying, no, that's not true. That's not how it works. I'm going to be the responsible adult as a business owner. These are the windows of time that I talk to people, and people respect you for that. They actually, when I started to put boundaries up, so I'm going to give an example of how this doesn't work. When I started my podcast, Sandy was my first guest, and I went out on social media and I did a post and I got a whole bunch of people reply that they wanted to be on my podcast. I was like, yeah, this is going to be great. I overbooked myself so much. I was exhausted. I was doing like 2 recordings a week and I was doing all the editing myself. I was doing all the posting myself because my husband was still working. He hadn't started helping me yet. And I remember looking at my calendar and not even realizing that I had done it to myself, thinking I had to. I had to say yes to everybody who filled out the form. I had to fit them into my calendar. And I was like, I don't even remember when the aha hit me. Maybe I was exhausted and I was like, no, I'm not doing anymore. I think it was, I had a spreadsheet and I was keeping track on the spreadsheet. And when I got to like 50 guests, and I realized that I couldn't fit them on my calendar within the next like 6 months, I was like, I have too many guests. And that was like the aha of like, I get to pick. I don't have to say yes to all these people. It didn't hit me. I didn't think of it that way. So I love that you're bringing awareness to this for the entrepreneur, because we don't realize what patterns we're in, and they bleed into us building a business. I was only a year into my business when I started my podcast, and I teach people how to start businesses. So I'm going to say, hello, nobody is exempt from this happening. We don't realize it. It's subconscious. I was just like, nope, they have to be on my, I didn't sit and look at my calendar and go, I have to do that. I just did it naturally because it was like part of what I do. I just say yes to everybody. That was huge learning for me.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think here's another beautiful example. And I've talked about this on my podcast as well about I didn't have the same experience as you growing up, but I still had that same feeling of needing to be everything to everybody because of my upbringing. I was the oldest. It was just my brother and I was the oldest. So I was the responsible one and taking care of things and making sure, like we had chores to do. I had to make sure that dinner was at least started or not started, at least on the table when my parents, they both worked full time. So my brother and I were latchkey kids. So even though my experience growing up was very different from yours, but yet we have similar wounds, if you will, from the standpoint of that whole feeling like you need to be everything to everybody and saying yes to everybody. And that's part of, I mean, I've talked about the trauma energetics piece of coaching, and you and I are both certified in that. And you do it with your clients as well. But we don't realize how that affects all of our decisions in relationships, in business, in marriages, kids, the whole thing. So I think I wanted to share that from the standpoint of showing, and I've even talked about on my podcast how I have had experiences that are related to every single people pleasing persona that I talk about, just like in the personality patterns that we use in trauma energetics. It's the same thing. You have gifts and you have wounds, and it's being able to get to the point to choose where you're coming from on each and when to be able to use each, which I think is an important piece that gets missed a lot of times, and why I think it's so valuable in what you and I both do, even though we don't coach on the same things, but we have similar tools that we can utilize. And I think that's important to point out to potential clients who might be listening out there.
Yeah, we have all of these. Everybody has access to all of them all the time. It's, are you intentionally picking them? And this is what happened to me. I was doing things automatically. So it
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, as an employee, so I came from the corporate world and I came from the healthcare. So both of those, you get fed information. And I know you have a HR background. You sit down at your desk in corporate and they're like, here's what you do. This is your job description. These are the things you do. And so you get into a habit of, I just do what I'm told. I just do what's given to me. I just say yes to whatever's in front of me because I'm getting paid for it. And that doesn't translate as a business owner. As a business owner, you get to choose. So my audience, I talk to medical people, they don't get to choose their patients. They walk into a room and that's who they have. That's the case they have. That's the illness they have. Like, they have no choice at all. And then they come into being an entrepreneur and so then again, automatically, oh, I just say yes to everybody. That's where the money comes from. The money comes from saying yes. We're conditioned as employees that money is saying yes and doing the thing. But as an entrepreneur, we get to choose, and that feels so uncomfortable and it's
Mm-hmm.
foreign. So choosing when you work, choosing what clients you work with, choosing when you do a podcast episode. I mean, I just recently changed so I don't do them every week. Well, I got to pick that. I got to choose that. And I'm going into 4 years of my podcast. And there are days when I still go, do I really want to do this way? Do I want to switch it up? Because I'm in the habit of just, Suzy said to do it this way a year ago. So we're just going to keep doing it that way because that's what Suzy said. Again, Suzy being the boss. But I get to question myself whenever I want. And that's what I love about your podcast is that you get people to go, let me pause for a minute. Let me question myself. Do I really want to say yes to this? Do I really want to say no to this? Do I really want to ask for help in this situation? Just taking that split second pause and questioning yourself is so powerful. And it works in relationships, it works even in a job. Yes, you have to do your job, but you can question things. I had an example that my sister used to, she's like, how is it that you do whatever you want at work? Because the jobs that I would get, I worked from home in the 90s because I asked my boss, do you mind if I just work from home on Tuesdays and Thursdays? And they're like, I'm like, I have a laptop, it unplugs. I can just take it home. They're like, well, yeah, I don't see why not. And my sister's like, how do you get to work from home 2 days a week? I said, I just asked. Nobody asks.
Because we make assumptions. We assume that they're going to respond a certain way. And we do the same thing. Entrepreneurs and whoever can do the same thing with clients by a tiny little look on their face. And we interpret it may not even be totally related. It could be something completely different. And maybe they're pausing to determine what their response is going to be. But we have this tendency because of our backgrounds and because of how we were raised and those wounds that came up to bring all that with us in everything that we do, including starting a business and being entrepreneurs. That's beautiful, beautiful. I know we've talked a lot about boundaries, and I like to keep these episodes short. So we'll have to have Suzy come back because there'll be tons. I will say, I just love your story about all of the different, when you overbooked yourself with guests. And because of your experience and you shared it with me, it's one of the reasons why, I mean, I've had my podcast for a year, and this is the first guest that I've had because I was like, okay, well, I want to get better at this myself and learn this myself before I start bringing more people in. So there will be more guests in the future, but they won't be every week. And so I'm going to space them out. And that's part of the beauty of learning from other people's lessons. So, what would be your biggest piece of advice of how to make that happen, how to establish that when everything inside of you is fighting against doing that because you're afraid? And there's that because we have that fear because you're afraid that you're going to lose a client or they're going to say no.
So I like this. This is I'm going to say foolproof because every time I've tested it with myself and I've tested it with clients, it works. Write it down. So I'm going to use the example because we're talking about boundaries. Write down your office hours. If you write them down, you can just do a Google Doc and then put it on your calendar. So if you're using an electronic one or a paper one, it doesn't matter, but start work at X time, end work at X time. When you write things down, then this is a medical thing, probably more, it's a legal thing too, because it's always legal. If it didn't get written down, it didn't happen. So there's a mental process that your body goes through when you write something down, even if you do it on your computer. You think it, saying it makes it even more powerful. So tell somebody, tell your spouse, tell your kids, tell your friends, these are my working hours, and write them down. And then you take the emotion out of it. So anything that you need to put a boundary on, I only do 3 podcast guests a year, or I only do 1 podcast guest a quarter. Write it down. It becomes a policy, becomes your business policy. You can just write them down so that you have them to remind yourself to, you don't have to get emotional about it. That's just what it is. When someone comes to you and says, "Oh my gosh, Sandy, I love your podcast. I want to be on your podcast as a guest," you have a filter. You can then go, "I've already had 3 guests. I'm not booking more till next year." And you just remove the emotion. You didn't say no to them. You can still say no if they're not a fit. But I always encourage people, have an application process, have them fill stuff out. You're going to have people drop off that really don't have the effort if you make them do something. So I always like to give them a filter, but also know what it is that you're doing. Write it down. It works with your pricing. It works with your hours. It works with anything really. If you write it down and you say, "This is what it is," then it's easier to tell people, this is my policy. It's not personal. It's just
I love
policy.
that. I love that. And I wanted to touch on, you named having an application, and that you were talking about podcast, but I know that you have kind of an application process for clients. So could you share a little bit about that? Because I think that that's another way that somebody, an entrepreneur, can set some boundaries to help them with those people pleasing tendencies.
Yeah. And I want to touch on, this is a healing process because we all have our own experiences in life that have created these patterns for us. So if I had to work up to having this process, it wasn't something I did when I very first started. I could have done it and it would have put my nervous system into a tailspin. Like I would have been so like freaked out. So for those of you listening, if you're brand new, think about it in stages. Do small steps towards having boundaries when it comes to like applications and processes and things like that. Start small and then you can add to it. So I would say my process, people have to talk to me twice on a Zoom call before I actually work with them on purpose. The purpose behind it is they have to fill out a questionnaire before they book with me, their very first call. And I ask specific questions. They have to answer yes or no. And it forces them to know what their boundary is. And it forces them to say yes or no to specific things I need to know. And if they don't fill it out, they don't get a call with me. So they have to fill it out. Then when it comes to me, I can see what they said yes or no to. So I then have an idea of where they're coming from, which gives me more power in my own yes or no, because I can read it and go, is this really somebody that I want to spend my time talking to? Are they somebody that I really feel is going to benefit from having a conversation with them, which saves time on my calendar? Instead of saying yes to everybody, like I did with my podcast, having my calendar full. So that's one layer. If I decide, yes, I want to talk to them, then I can approve it and then they get booked on my calendar. During that call, again, I decide, do I want them to schedule a next call with me? And I can tell them at that moment, now's not a good, if we're not aligned. Here's recommendations for what I would recommend for you because you don't fit my program right now, or whatever the case may be. But if I do feel it's a fit, they feel like if both of us are like, yeah, I want to talk more, then we do a longer call and I book with them. And then by the time you have the second call, and this is tapping into what you talked about with pricing and asking for people to pay you, it's easier. We have a relationship. I've built that relationship with them. I know I like them. They know they like me. It's a lot more comfortable than just randomly saying yes and filling up your calendar with a bunch of people that don't even really fit what you need or how it's going to go. And I've just learned over time, when I do this process, by the time I talk to people, they're already like mostly wanting to work with me.
It's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. And I asked you to share that not so that necessarily people can do the same thing because they don't have to, but just to see where the people pleasing can fall in to those things. Because I mean, I don't have an application process. However, I have over time worked things through, so I know, and my messaging is all related to people pleasing at this point. And so it's being able to have those conversations to see whether someone's a good fit and to drive home the point that you don't have to say yes to everybody just because they have approached you. I have said no to potential clients before because they were not a good match. And I shared with them why. Would I have done that when I first started? Probably not. And I would have gone ahead and worked with them, but I got to the point where I was able to do that. So my point being is that, and as I talk about, it's a work. All of us are our work in progress, and being able to build those skills. And whether you're working with somebody like Suzy or somebody like me, that you're working with somebody to help you work through those, but always working on building your skills to help you move away from those people pleasing tendencies because they're exhausting. If you said
Yeah.
yes to everybody, at some point you're going to burn out. And I'm sure you probably felt that way when you realized I can't put all these podcast guests on my calendar. You're probably at that point questioning, why am I even doing this? It's being able to work through all of those things.
Yeah. And I want to highlight for the listeners, if you know that you're a people pleaser and you resonate with what Sandy's talking about on her podcast with any of this, even if you're not an entrepreneur, reach out for help. Because I have to tell you, I didn't know I was doing it. Looking back now, hindsight's always 2020. Looking back and seeing, oh my goodness, I'm listening to Sandy's podcast going, oh my gosh, that's what I was doing. It's something that you learn once you're aware. So I would say reach out to get help if you are now aware as a listener that you have people pleasing tendencies and you're doing it all the time and you're trying to figure out why you feel empty, why you feel depleted, why you don't, you're just exhausted. Talk to Sandy. I have to say that. Talk to Sandy, because having the awareness then leads to what can I do to change it? Because once you change it, I now have this huge process that people have to go through to get to me. And I love it. And I'm not exhausted. I don't book everybody that asks to be a guest on my podcast anymore. And it's beautiful. But I didn't know what I didn't know. So you guys are hearing the end result with me. But I want to tell you, back in those days, I didn't see it. I just kept booking people and just kept saying yes without even knowing what I was doing. So definitely reach out to Sandy if this resonates with you at all. Have a conversation with her because she can point you in the direction that would be helpful.
Thank you for that. Okay, why is that little I'm not sure. This whole automatic thing on Zoom is pretty funny, but anyway, so just ignore that little thumbs down because it should have been a thumbs up. Let's do that instead. But thank you for that. And likewise, if you are interested and have thought about starting a business, or maybe you've already started, but you're kind of feeling like you're a little lost, I would encourage you to reach out to Suzy. She has helped me tremendously. I have worked with her. I continue to work with her. I've learned a tremendous amount from her. She has so many resources. And so, with that, where is the best place for them to reach out to you?
The best place to find me is my website, startingabusinesssimplified.com. Everything's there. My podcast link is there, and there's a place to schedule a call with me, with knowing that you're going to have to talk to me multiple times. But yeah, they can reach me there.
Awesome. And I will put those links in the show notes for anybody that wants to reach out to her. Again, tremendous, tremendous resources. So, any final parting little tidbit you want to share with everybody before we say goodbye?
I would say I have the one thing that, and I know, Sandy, you talk about this, and I just want to emphasize it as another person, another voice in the room. Before you answer or make a decision, pause, even just for a minute, and really think about what you want to say, how you want to answer or make that decision. And if you have time, sleep on it. Like, allow yourself to actually spend 24 hours without answering it. it will make a huge difference in just reeling in some of the people pleasing that you might be having going on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being my very first guest. I appreciate you so much, more than you know. What a powerful conversation. I love how Suzy brought practical wisdom to something we often overlook, and that's how people pleasing follows us into business. If you're an entrepreneur learning to set boundaries, I hope today reminded you that your business doesn't have to drain you to be successful. Suzy's links are in the show notes, and if this conversation sparked something inside you, take a moment to pause and ask, where am I still saying yes when I mean no? Until next time, be true to you.